What an ultimate bit that would be. What a rib. What a heel move.
The Natick Wrestling Federation. Being a promoter at 13, walk me through some of that.
We made it happen. Just kind of cold called and emailed people. Johnny Clash, his first match ever was at Natick Wrestling Federation. Anthony Green, Teddy Goodz, Shark Boy, Demolition, Zach Gowan. Some really, really incredible people. My mind does first go to prestige when you say that word home, but I've maybe worked with Veda more than anyone else. I got to film a Wrestling with Regret video with him earlier this year, and it made that 12, 13-year-old Jordan the happiest that he's ever been. And my favorite part of those shows aren't even calling the wrestling, it's just talking wrestling with him beforehand. Aria's a handful, man. The brat definitely came out to play. I've gotten the pleasure and the honor, frankly, of working with Dave Prazak. Calling their matches at the Academy Showcase, different wrestlers entirely. A lot of hair up here. It's going to be thinner or gray by the time I'm done with Alan Angels, man.
So what's the percent of Natick Wrestling Federation returning?
Oh, man. You know, it's something I thought of over the years, man. It really is. Never say never.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the channel. Another episode of Best for Business. Now, I'm pumped for this one. We just talked about it. I haven't seen this guy since I think it was February, but Jordan Castle, man, thank you for joining me for this one.
Thank you for having me, man. Yeah, I'm very excited to do this. I had a blast working with you back east in February, and I'm looking forward to chopping it up some more on a different platform.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So let's learn about you. So I remember you telling me a while ago you had a theater background, and that was something that you enjoyed. And I knew you said for a while ring announcing was your main goal. So walk me through how pro wrestling, I assume, was something that you liked, but how did that all happen to where you are today?
You know, it's funny. I discovered both theater and pro wrestling around the same time. I was about 8 or 9 years old. And I was a very shy kid growing up, which is a shocker, honestly. If you've ever met me or heard me on commentary, I tend to be a very loud, sort of expressive, what's the word I'm looking for? Outgoing person, I guess. And around the same time, I both discovered wrestling as a fan, started watching wrestling as a kid, and started doing local community theater through school. And I think that those kind of worked in tandem in getting me out of my shell and helping me find a certain confidence from a very young age. Always loved wrestling, always had the pipe dream of being an announcer or a ring announcer specifically. Never wanted to be involved in it from a physical standpoint. You know, I respected the hell out of it, loved the art of it, but just knew that I wasn't a super athletic kid, wasn't a super tough kid, to be honest. And that wasn't something that was feasible or made sense or really appealed to me at all. So I always had that dream, and throughout elementary school, middle school, high school, college, continued to pursue theater, which is in a lot of ways very similar to wrestling. It's not a one-to-one thing, but they're both performance art. They both involve a lot of articulation, a lot of public speaking, a lot of fancy attire and production. And there's a lot of similarities there, as much as some people might sort of turn their nose up at that comparison. Yeah, always knew I wanted to do wrestling, always had theater, and kind of used that theater experience and that theater background as I started to enter wrestling and tried to divvy up to promoters and say, hey, you know, this is something that I want to do, and this is something that I'm interested in. And, you know, I might not have this wrestling experience in the same way or this announcing experience in the same way, but I do have this theater background, and I am pursuing a degree in this. And I think a lot of what I learned from theater, both personally and professionally, has helped me a lot as far as just having that confidence, as far as finding what they call your Chekhov space, which is basically just a neutral space where everything comes from. So you're not kind of bringing any of your, it's very like theater nerd, very like artsy fartsy, but bringing any of your kind of baggage from outside into it. As far as projecting, as far as articulating, like I said, as far as, you know, when I'm on commentary, some pretty crazy, ridiculous stuff can happen. And to treat it all with legitimacy and drop yourself into, okay, this is what's happening in the narrative that we're in the world that we're in, and make that as legitimate and as real as it can be, I think all stems from that theater background. So I maybe didn't realize it at the time, but I think they worked in tandem a lot more than I thought.
Nice. So when we talk about theater, when you did act and all that, do you have a favorite like performance or role you had in acting?
Oh gosh, that's tough, man. There were some good ones. My mind first goes to Seussical. I was in the 6th grade. I was Horton in Seussical the musical, the elephant, of course, from the titular Horton Hears a Who or Horton Sits on the Egg. For those who don't know, Seussical is a musical entirely comprised of characters and stories from the Dr. Seuss book. So you got the Grinch in there, you got the Great Butter Battle, you got gosh, I'm blanking now. Of course, both the Horton movies. You got the Yertle the Turtle. You got the one feathered tale of Maisie LaBird or Gertrude McFuzz. I'm just naming Dr. Seuss stories now, but it's a really cool thing, especially for youth theater. It's very accessible for kids who grew up on those books, and who didn't, especially from our generation. But I love that show. I love that role. I remember that was very early on something that I talked about instilling a lot of confidence in me. The fact that I was trusted by so many of these adults and peers of mine, frankly, to take this role at such a young age, being fairly new to this stuff. And I have some really, really fond memories from that cast and those shows. Yeah, so Seussical is definitely up there, but shit, man, around the same time I did Shrek. I was the gingerbread man in that, which I love a lot. Yeah, man, have a lot of great reverence for that. Was in a production of The Tempest, William Shakespeare's The Tempest, beginning of high school, which I also loved a great deal. Did a lot of Shakespeare.
How long did you do theater? Until high school?
No, I mean, it gets a little fishy. All through middle school, all through high school.
Nice.
Majored in it in high school
Nice.
at a private arts high school. So I was a theater major, and then went to college for screen acting, which
Nice.
was technically a separate thing, but what it really was just a bastard child of the film program and the theater program. And so I took classes in each. And then there were some classes that were specialized just for screen actors, but it's mostly like, hey, you're going to take some theater classes and you're also going to take film classes, kind of understand the production side of things and how the sausage is made. And so essentially all through college, 12 years straight, 13 years straight. And then one could argue that even out of college, working in wrestling, I'm still doing it now. So there it is.
Yeah, that's true. I did theater until like 8th grade, but then when that came, I stopped. Like I did 10-man Linus, a bunch of stuff. When time to high school, I gave up on that.
Yeah, man. I was in Wizard of Oz. I was the lion. So
nice,
we got a little,
nice.
Little quadrant, little off to see the wizard thing going on here.
So when we talk about it, I remember on one of the podcasts, it might have been Respect the Craft, you talked about originally you liked ring announcing because it's kind of like theater. You're amping up the crowd and all that. But you mentioned originally you weren't that like outgoing. So when did you like start building that confidence?
Again, I think a lot of it came from theater. I remember the first production I did was Mulan back in middle school, which problematic in hindsight, probably not a show that a white Jewish guy should be doing. But I was in the 5th grade. I didn't know any better. But I think that was the start of it. And also watching wrestling, it sounds kind of crazy to say, but seeing like DX and John Cena and all these larger than life characters, I feel like I found a sort of identity through that, whether that was doing the catchphrases or reciting promos or wearing that merch. I feel like it really gave me a thing and gave me a hyper fixation, for lack of a better word, to latch onto. And I can't credit it enough, both theater and wrestling, for giving me that. But probably around the age of 9 or 10 is when I would say that started to happen.
Nice. So that was a part of that I'm pumped for. So I must have did like around like 2 hours of research on you, going through social medias, finding things we could talk about. One thing that I really want to talk about, the Natick Wrestling Federation, I believe it was called.
Boy,
I saw your tweet, but then I saw a while ago you were tagged. I think your mom made a post years ago about it, like from her perspective. So walk me through at such a young age, what was going through your mind? What was like your overall goal? And being a promoter at 13, walk me through some of that.
So for those uninitiated, the Natick Wrestling Federation was my wrestling company that I ran I started the process as a 12-year-old boy. The actual show happened when I was 13, about 10 years ago now, over 10 years ago now, which is pretty crazy to think about. But I had the idea. I remember it was summer 2013. I had been watching wrestling, loving wrestling, obsessed with wrestling for about 4 years at that point. It started going to local shows from Chaotic to Millennium Wrestling Federation around New England, where I know both you and I are from. And I don't know, honestly know where the idea came from. I think I just went to a lot of these shows and I saw, they weren't happening at the scale of, TV products like WWE or TNA. They were happening in these Polish American veterans clubs and these little rinky dink high school gyms. And I thought, man, this looks really fun and really accessible. And I've sort of built a rapport with certain people, both in front of and behind the curtain, and it can't be too hard. And this was, me at 12 years old, the polar opposite from that sort of shy, no confidence kid that we were talking about a second ago. I thought, this is something I can do. And I told my parents, as you mentioned, you saw my mom's Facebook post. They could not have been more supportive. I think they both said to me and publicly, like they didn't really think it was something that would actually pan out and happen. But you know, credit where credit is due. They supported me every step of the way, and I didn't give up on it. And we made it happen. I reached out to as many people as I could, just kind of cold called and emailed people from every level, from you know, your local small town indie guy like a Johnny Clash.
Oh, I love him.
Love Johnny Clash.
He's coming on in a few weeks.
Oh, look at that. What a small world. No,
I brought him out of retirement for this one.
That's amazing. I can't thank Johnny enough. And he has had a hell of a career since then, but you should mention this to him on the podcast. His first match ever was at Natick Wrestling Federation.
No.
Because we knew each other for years because we used to E-Fed together. And kids, if you don't know.
Oh my God, I love that.
E-Fedding is when you role play wrestling. You basically like on message boards and forums and stuff, create your own characters and write your own promos and script your own shows. And me and Johnny Clash, I'm forgetting the name now. There was I want to say WWO was one of them, and maybe MPW. It's escaping me now, but he was Johnny Clash on the message boards, and I had a litany of terrible characters, and we you know kept in touch and you know got to know each other through there. And I said at one point, "Hey, I'm running my own show," and he said, "Hey, I'm training to wrestle." And his first match ever ended up being against Joey the Rage Riker.
Yep.
At Natick Wrestling Federation's one and only show. Can't thank Johnny enough. Awesome guy. Helped a ton with the setup of the website and the posters. He's the man. Love him to death. So please do send him my best, and please do mention that. But
I'll ask him. Yeah. So walk me through at 13 years old. What's the day of the show going through your head?
Oh gosh, I mean, it was a process, man. As anyone who's ever been a promoter can tell you, it's a lot of ups and a lot of downs. Obviously, there's the positives of it, the creative side, and getting to kind of bring that vision to life, and especially at such a young age, to be a part of it from the other side of the curtain. But it's a lot of headaches, man. It's a lot of flights getting canceled and people pulling out day of, or people getting injured, or deposits not going through, all those sort of real life adult stuff. And again, credit to my folks, they kind of helped and did a lot of heavy lifting with that end of it. I really cannot thank them enough. But day of was awesome. I mean, a lot of nerves, but a lot of excitement. And I look back and I cringe in a lot of ways, especially seeing my 13-year-old self, buzz cut and mismatched Crocs doing the ring announcing. But I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud of what we put together and some of the talent that was on that show. You know, Anthony Green was on that show a year into his career, and now he's taken over the world in New England. Teddy Goodz was on that show, and he just recently, I know you were a part of it, Chris, celebrated the end of an incredible career that he's had. Shark Boy, Demolition, Zach Gowan, some really, really incredible people. The Boogeyman.
The John Cena Sr. Johnny
Fabo, man. I mean, come on. The best of the
Robbie
best.
The Giant. You had a stacked roster for that one.
Thank you. Funny to say that after Robbie the Giant, because he is indeed a small man. But I'm really proud of how it turned out, and I'm really proud more than anything that we did do that to raise money for Make-A-Wish Foundation and managed to raise a little bit of cheddar for them. And so as much as I look back and cringe at some of the booking and some of my ring announcing, I'm very proud. And I remember from the day feeling very stressed, but just feeling really, really proud and really excited and really happy more than anything.
So what's the percent of Natick Wrestling Federation returning?
Oh, man. You know, it's something I thought of over the years, man. It really is. It really is. It sounds strange to say. I think now that I'm involved in wrestling, I'm less likely to bring it back. I'm less likely to ever run again. It's less appealing to me, which sounds sort of backwards, because it's like, well, now you know so much more and you have so much more connections, and it would probably be a better show. And you're probably right about that. But at the same time, I've seen it from the other side. For a perfect example, I just came back from Portland for Roseland 9, amazing show from Prestige Wrestling. But less than 72 hours before that show, half the card thrown out the window. Xia Li, Jordan Grace, FTR, all these huge stars that were supposed to be on that show because of Hurricane Helene, unable to make it. And so with 72 hours notice, William Quintana, promoter, booker, owner of Prestige, threw together an amazing card and made magic happen. I think it's one of the best shows we've ever done. But just talking to him, and even on the day, seeing the stress that came with that process, I would not wish it on my own worst enemy. Again, the creative side of it is amazing.
Yeah.
The getting to bring your vision to life and getting to kind of play matchmaker and do all that stuff, that's incredible. But I just would not want to deal with the emotional or financial headache that comes with the job. And also, I think, like, I don't know, there can be a sort of tension that comes with being a promoter, as far as like, oh, you know, how much are you paying people, and who do you pick to do this, and how do you book a certain thing? And it's like, now that I'm working with these guys on a regular basis and sharing a locker room with them, and I don't have the same equity that I did as a cute, spunky, 12-year-old kid, I'm not sure if I'm ready for that kind of pushback or that kind of flack. So never say never. It's definitely something I've thought of. NWF Redemption would be
we got to bring it back.
If you go to the NWF Twitter, that's buried, deep in the annals of X, as it were now, I believe there's like a little teaser graphic I made just in case. But never say never. It's not impossible, but I wouldn't hold your breath.
Well, you went out on top. What a show. And like the quality on YouTube for how many years ago? It's actually like good. I was
about 10 years ago, man.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, shout out to Jimmy James. I don't know if he has a production company necessarily, but still works a ton with a bunch of promotions back east. Specifically does a lot with Beyond and Wrestling Open. He's the man. His whole team is great. And actually, got to give all the credit in the world to Teddy Goodz, who we just talked about, closed his career on a high note and went out on top. I did not in any way plan to film or organize a film crew at all. And he got Jimmy and his people to come through free of charge and do that. It wasn't something that I even thought of, let alone facilitated. And they all came in and did it. And I'm so glad they did, because it would have been so sad if that show was, lost to time and it was just a few iPhone photos here and there. So credit to Teddy, credit to Jimmy, and it looks pretty good, man. I got to be honest, for the time especially.
Well, I know we talked about him wrapping up his career. I probably texted him every day since, saying in like 2 years he'll be back. So I wouldn't be surprised. It's pro wrestling.
I hope so, man. I got to technically I ring announced him then, and he also, my first ever ring announcing gig, if you want to get really technical, was back at Top Rope Promotions a year before that he facilitated to ring announce special guest ring announcer for a match between him and the Promise Antonio Thomas, of course, now Thomas Santel. So got to work with him a couple times as a boy, but have never properly ring announced him or called a match of his now that I'm, really, really doing this thing. So as happy as I am for him, and as much as I wish him the best, I would not complain at all if he were to go back on his word and pull a Ric Flair somewhere down the line.
Oh yeah, for sure. But let's continue to talk about you. So you've done a lot of impressive things at such a young age, but what would you say was like your first big chance in wrestling?
First big chance in wrestling has to be Violence and Suffering. I give all the credit in the world to VXS and Isaac, who runs the show over there. I think I mentioned, I started cold calling and emailing people a few years ago saying, hey, this wrestling stuff, this is something I've always wanted to do. You might know me as a fan, going to these shows. And you got a lot of no's, and you got even more left on reds, which I understand. There's a lot of really talented people who do this commentary stuff and this ring announcing stuff. And why the hell am I going to take the chance on some fan? But Isaac was the first person to say, I see something in you and I'm willing to take a shot on you, and give me the opportunity to call the pre-show for VXS's Party All the Time in New Jersey, August of 2021, if I'm not mistaken. And I cannot thank him enough, truly. The faith and the trust he had in me, for no real reason besides just, a gut feeling and kind of liking me as a guy, getting along with me as a person. All the credit in the world to him. He was the first domino to fall, and VXS will always be home because of that. The Trap House, the Bando.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. So that is I was going to ask you, what company do you consider home? So that would be it?
It's tough because I don't work for VXS as much as I used to. I think they are a home. I'm fortunate that I have many homes, I think. I think with them being back east, with them running a little more infrequently, haven't had the chance to go back and work there as much as I maybe would have liked, but we'll always have a soft spot in my heart for them. My mind does first go to Prestige when you say that word home, just because I've worked for them so regularly for the last 2.5 years, and the quality of those shows, like I said, are just unbelievable. And for William, as I mentioned, to think of me and invest in me, to buy me a flight and to put me up as early as he did and as young as I was, it's unprecedented, I think, for that to happen for kind of ancillary talent like a commentator or a ring announcer or a production person or a referee in any case. And for him to do that when I was less than 2 years in or less than a year in, actually, that is not lost on me. And for him to continue to do that over the years, from Portland to LA to Worcester to Asbury Park, New Jersey, means a lot to me. And I'm really, really proud of the voice that I found there and the body of work that I've built there. So I've had to narrow it down to one.
Yeah.
I would say Prestige, but there's a lot of places that I consider home, man. I think back east, Chaotic's a home base. I think GCW is a real home base across the world. New Japan is quickly.
Oh yeah, we'll talk about them. We'll talk about all these places.
Bring it in, man. But no, if I had to narrow it down to one, I'd say Prestige. But I'm very fortunate to say that I feel like I have a lot of that comfort and equity in a lot of places.
So one of the things I love about Jordan Castle is your presence on Twitter. I feel like a lot of people, they don't capitalize on social media, and I feel like you do. So some of the commentary partners I want to talk about, maybe your first interaction working with them. Let's talk about it. Let's start off with somebody I got to work with you also, Veda Scott.
Oh, Veda Scott's fantastic. Another person that I worked with very, very early on, I believe for the first time, was LA Fights in February of 2022. And I haven't done the math. I haven't crunched the numbers, but I've maybe worked with Veda more than anyone else, from GCW to Prestige to Fight Life, all across the country, frankly. Veda's great. Veda is an absolute blast. So many fun little inside jokes that we've developed over the years, whether it be Nermal from Garfield or the Muppet Family Christmas. Had the good fortune to work together for Pandemonium Pro Wrestling late last year, and it was a sort of anime themed show, and neither one of us are anime fans per se. And so we chose the next best thing. We dressed as Gene, and oh my gosh, I'm outing myself now because I don't even watch the show. I think it was the rabbit ears, right? The rabbit ears. Luis, that's what it was. That's what it was. We were gonna do Tina because Veda was like, "Well, I'm more Tina in real life, and then I'd be your mom," and that's kind of weird. So we did the cosplay thing there. Veda's a blast. I cannot say enough good things about them, about their partner, Speedball. They're taking over the world, man. They're everywhere and anywhere for a reason. And anytime that I get to share a booth with them, anytime I get to call a Speedball match is a good day.
So you talk about Veda Scott. You probably called more matches with Veda than anybody. Do you remember that first interaction you had with Veda, the first time meeting?
Yeah, I remember it was LA Fights. Like I said, back in February. Actually, I remember we were sitting down, kind of talking before the show, figuring out who was going to call what and what the card was looking like. I don't remember what sketch exactly, but I remember they made and I think you should leave reference. They did a little quote from Tim Robinson's sketch show on Netflix, which if you haven't seen it, is one of the funniest things in the world, one of the funniest things on television today, and a solid 40% of my vernacular are quotes from that show. And I believe they were like, "I'm gonna rip the fucking chin off," or it was something. It was that, or it was triples is best, triples is safe. Some stupid quote from that show, but they dropped that, and I was like, okay, this person's pretty cool. They've been around the block. They've been doing this a while. They got this huge social media following. They've been off to Japan and the UK, but they're a Tim Robinson fan. They're quoting, "I think you should leave it. We're gonna get along all right," and we did.
Nice. The next one I want to ask you about, Brian Zane.
Yes, just worked with Brian this past Sunday for Prestige. Brian's the man. I've said this time and time again. Someone that I grew up on. Around the same time that I was booking and running Natick Wrestling Federation, I discovered his YouTube channel, Wrestling with Regret, and I think it, as strange as it sounds, it helped me look at wrestling in a very different way and understand a lot of the nuances of wrestling that I maybe recognized but couldn't quite articulate or couldn't quite wrap my head around. To be the nostalgia critic or to be the angry video game nerd for wrestling. There's so much content in the wrestling space now, but there wasn't someone doing that. There wasn't someone making that type of wrestling content and making wrestling history and the niche of wrestling, whether it's these, crazy gimmicks from way back when, or these companies that no one remembers or whatever it is, to make that accessible and to make that entertaining the way he did and the way he continues to do. He does not and will never get enough credit for that. So I was always a fan of his, and to work together the last couple of years in Prestige, not only to work together, but to gel together the way we have. I'm not even saying this is like, oh, like I'm awesome or we're the best, but like we just have chemistry. And that's something you can't teach. We just clicked instantly. We clicked as people and we clicked as co-commentators, and we instantly had this rapport back and forth that I have found with very few other people. We say it every time we work together, but it is a night off with Brian, and it is consistently a dream come true. And if I could do it every weekend, I would. I got to film a Wrestling with Regret video with him earlier this year, and it made that 12, 13-year-old Jordan the happiest that he's ever been. It's just been the coolest, most full circle thing, man.
Yeah, and one of the things about you when you talk about Twitter is I give you credit. You take photos with everyone. So I was going through to see who you had the most with. The next one I want to ask you about Jack Farmer.
Yes, Jack is Brian is my one of my, along with Cody Van Whistler, one of my broadcast colleagues for the Portland, the PNW side of Prestige. And Jack Farmer is my LA co-commentator for the Los Angeles shows. Jack's great, man. A consummate professional. I mean, someone who just comes so prepared and takes his job so seriously. And I believe he said something to the effect of this on social media at one point. But my favorite part of those shows aren't even calling the wrestling. It's just talking wrestling with him beforehand. I feel like we could go back and forth on a podcast or even just off air, kind of shooting the shit and fantasy booking. It's really, really cool to find someone who has that sensibility. That's those same sensibilities, I should say, not just professionally, but personally. Yeah. Well, I mean, what more can you say? He's handsome as hell and he's a sharp presser and he's the man. He's Jack Farmer.
Yeah. And then the next one I seen you post a lot of photos with Aria Perkins.
Yes. Recently worked with Aria for the first time at Kitsune Women's Wrestling, a newer promotion out here, a Japanese women's promotion based in the greater Los Angeles area. Aria's a handful, man. We had a lot of fun on that stream, but the brat definitely came out to play, and she kept me on my toes all night. That's what I'll say. She definitely didn't let anything slip past, but kept me sharp. Had a good time. I hope the people at home did too, and certainly wouldn't mind doing it again.
Yeah, you've called with some of the best, and somebody else, I forgot which show I was watching, but you commentate with Dave Prazak, right?
Yes, I've gotten the pleasure and the honor, frankly, of working with Dave Prazak at GCW pretty regularly for over 2 years now. And that, talk about a dream come true. Talk about something that I never imagined in my wildest dreams, getting to do once, let alone getting to do on a monthly basis, pretty much. It's absurd.
What was the first time meeting Dave?
First time meeting Dave was end of 2021, a GCW show that I was just at before I started working with them, before I started doing LA fights, anything like that. I was there to help out and show face. And Dave was there to do commentary, as he does, because he's the best in the world. And I remember just talking to him beforehand and saying, hey, so nice to meet you. Such a big fan. I look up to your work a lot. I'm also a commentator, blah, 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 blah. And I actually felt terrible about this. I was mortified in the moment. It's funny looking back, but it wasn't so funny at the time. I'm talking to the guy, I'm shaking his hand, we're having this conversation. As I'm sure you know, as someone who has done commentary with me before, I have a tendency to get very animated and very expressive, and totally by accident, I spit all over the guy's face. I'm talking a mile a minute like I am now. I'm all nervous, and I just big loogie all over the guy's face. And credit where credit is due, he couldn't have been more, gracious and cool about it. But I was like, well, there it is. I spit in Dave Prazak's face. I'm blackballed forever now.
Was that your first time doing GCW that happened?
That wasn't my first time doing GCW. That was just my first time at it. Not even my first time. That was just, I was at a GCW show in LA, helping out, showing face, just kind of making the rounds. Didn't end up working with him until I think June or July of 2022. It took a little bit of time. But since then, any GCW show that I've been at, he's also been at, because he is the voice of GCW. And I've found my way on one way or another. And I'm so glad I have, because I learned so much from that guy. I mean, talk about someone who's just a wealth of knowledge, so generous with this knowledge. Sometimes you meet these guys who've been doing it for a while and they're jaded or they're defensive of their spot or whatever it is. And that's never been Dave. Just so willing to teach and help however he can. And even if he's not trying to, even if he's not saying like, hey, watch this or try to do this, just working with him and communing with him and going back and forth with him. I feel like I learned so much every time. It is the biggest treat of my career. It truly is.
So I remember at Fight Life, me and you had to talk. Now we're going to talk about a match in a minute, but me and you were talking. I was telling you like my number one goal is to do something with Sean Spears. Still hasn't happened.
I know. Hey, listen, you got to get signed. You got to get signed, man. You got to get to NXT.
But you said it was for your guy was Cardona. So I remember you did a lot. I think you did something with their wedding with like the booker first. But what was it about Cardona? Why was he like the guy for you?
I gravitated towards Cardona a lot. I think I was such a young fan. I was in my honeymoon phase in wrestling, as I like to call it, because wrestling is never better than when you first start watching wrestling, no matter what the quality of the shows may or may not be. When you first start watching wrestling and you're still entranced by it, that honeymoon phase, the first year or two, like that is as good as it's ever going to get. No matter how good the actual wrestling is objectively, it's never going to be as good as when you first started watching it as a kid. And I think the timing of me watching it as a kid perfectly lined up with Cardona's run in WWE with the Rider Revolution.
Mm-hmm.
The way he capitalized on the internet. He will never get enough credit for this. But I truly believe, this is going to sound crazy, I truly believe wrestling looks very, very different in 2024 without Matt Cardona. I don't think there's an AEW without Matt Cardona. And you might think that's crazy. What do you mean? There's no AEW without All In. There's no All In without BTE. And I don't think there's a BTE without a Z True Long Island Story. Mm-hmm. Because as corny and goofy as that YouTube show was, that was the first time that anyone in a major way at that level understood and capitalized on the internet, on YouTube and social media and content through wrestling, and used content and social media and YouTube as a means to push themselves and to get over. And as an 11-year-old kid who was just getting into WWE and an 11-year-old kid who was just getting into YouTube, it was the perfect storm. So I was all in on Zack Ryder. I was all in on the Ryder Revolution, even after he cooled off in WWE for a little bit. Anytime he got to do anything, whether it was the Intercontinental title win at Mania 32 or the Major Brothers reunion, I was always on board. He's just always been that guy to me. He's always been one step ahead, always been a master of reinvention, and always had his finger on the pulse. And I, in many cases, was that pulse. So to get the chance to work with him multiple times over, especially earlier this year in his match with Nic Nemeth.
Let's talk about it. Because I
bring it
on social media, but then like that you were talking about, I forgot what the theme was of one year at WrestleMania. Was it Written in the Stars or something? You were like quoting the tweets. And then I remember my buddy Johnny Cashmere on his podcast, the ring announcer for GCW, MLJ, right?
MLJ, that's him.
And he was talking about, like, I forgot, there was matches that was crazy to him, but he said to see you, like, in your element during that match was cool to see. So walk me through, when you find out about the match that you're going to be able to call for, what's going through your mind for that one?
Well, first off, I love Emil to death. I'll have to seek that out. He's the man. He's been, more gracious and helpful to me than I could ever say. So shout out to Emil. It's a funny thing with GCW, and I'm going to say this, and people might take this as a negative, but it's not. I think it's part of what makes GCW so special. GCW is they're the last outlaws. Like, it's not an operation where everything is perfectly structured and we know all this, this is planned out and this is planned out and this is what it's going to be. It thrives in chaos the same way that something like an ECW did. It's mayhem all the time, but it's controlled chaos, and it's mayhem that works, and it always gets there, and you always get a great show out of it. So I'm in no means saying that as a negative, but when I'm booked to do a GCW show, I don't always know what that means. I don't know if that means half the show. I don't know if that means the whole show. I don't know if that means a couple matches. It really depends. And I usually don't find out until the day of. In this case was no different. Coldest winter 2, Cardona and Nemeth on that card. Didn't know until the day whether or not I was actually going to get the chance to call it, because there's a ton of great broadcasters in GCW. You talk about Emily, you talk about Veda. I think of the likes of a Carmen Michael or a Mose or a Nick Knowledge. There's a really, really great cast of characters on the call in GCW across the country and beyond, across the world on GCW. So I wasn't sure, honestly, when I showed up. I was crossing my fingers, and I told anyone who would listen, and I put it out on social media, kind of manifesting and trying to make it happen. But I did not know walking into the UCC that day whether it was going to happen. And of course, I'm parsing it out with Dave and Emil on the day. And I always like to give seniority to Emil because he is the voice of GCW, much like Dave. He ring announces all the shows. He travels around the world with them. He has seniority on me and then some. And so I always like to say to him, if there's anything you want to call that's important to you, like, I'll of course take a back seat. I'll of course, secede to that. And I just saw him get the worst, most shit-eating grin. And he goes, I don't really care about anything except for that one. And he points at Nemeth and Cardona. And I'm like, this guy's pulling my leg. This guy's totally jerking me around here. But I was like, maybe he's going to do it. Maybe he's going to, maybe he's going to take it from me. What an ultimate bit that would be. What a rib. What a heel move from MLJ. But sure enough, no, he said, this is yours. There's no one better to call it. Was as he always has been, incredibly gracious with letting me step in for a huge match like that. I'm really, really proud of that call, man. He said, in my element, I don't like to pat myself on the back or toot my own horn, but I do agree with that. I feel like that is it's like the Hulk meme from Avengers Endgame when he's talking about putting on the gauntlet. It's like I was made for this. And I
Yeah.
truly believe, as a child who started watching the WWE in 2009, I truly believe that's the case.
No, so we talk about prestige, we talk about GCW. I see the flag behind you. So walk me through New Japan. How did that happen? Now, is this your third time you've done it? Fourth?
So I've done three. Fourth is coming up on November 23rd.
Oh, how did it happen?
Yeah, so it's crazy. I remember I was nodding off to bed back in August of last year, August of 2023. It was like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I had to work early. I had a gig at like 8 a.m. That I had to get up for, and I was already going to be getting way too little sleep. And I'm going to bed, putting my head on the pillow, setting the alarm, checking everything for the last time, and I see I have a DM, and I open it, and it's from Justin Morales, who works in the office at New Japan Pro Wrestling. He says, "Hey, Jordan, just reaching out. I just wanted to see about your interest in working for New Japan Pro Wrestling on this date, whatever it is." And I literally dropped my phone. Like, I'm looking at this and I dropped my phone on the floor and I'm like, holy shit, fuck, what?
Yeah.
Like, I lost my mind. I thought I was seeing things. I thought I was actually going crazy. So, of course, messaged him back right away, said, yes, I'd love to make this happen. Here's my email. Here's this, here's that. Here's everything you need. Called my parents at like 3 in the morning or 2 in the morning, which is like, 5 a.m. for them.
So they're thinking it's probably like an emergency or something.
That's what I'm saying. I think the first thing I said was like, I'm okay. My car's okay. Like, I'm alive. Everything's good.
Yeah.
But I have this great news. That was a cool moment, man.
Nice.
I can't thank Justin enough again for thinking of me and for continuing to think of enough of me to bring me back. But that was a major moment, man. I think it's very easy in wrestling to get caught up in the hustle and the grind and to feel like, man, like there's. It sounds so stupid to say because it's the best gig in the world. And right here I am. Oh, I get to live my dream and I get to work with people like Cardona and Nic Nemeth, who I grew up watching. I get to make money traveling the world on someone else's dime. Like, how monotonous is that? But I just think like, it's a chase for a reason. You're chasing something. And sometimes when you're running like that, you can get tired.
Yeah.
And New Japan and getting that opportunity from New Japan and continuing to get the call back from New Japan has been a real, it's been a real motivator and a real symbol for me that, okay, you're doing something right. Like, it's really solidified that for me that, progress ain't linear and there's going to be ups and there's going to be downs and who knows where the road is leading us or how long that road's going to be, but you're doing something right. It was incredibly validating and it continues to be incredibly validating. And then I had to get up at like 6 or 7 a.m. On like 4 hours of sleep, knowing that I was working New Japan, still buzzing from that, and go work a funeral. So there it is.
Yeah. So you talk about that moment, getting that phone call working for New Japan. So I assume the first show to New Japan, you knocked it out of the park. How long after until you get that call for the second show?
Gosh, I don't remember. I appreciate that very much. Thank you. I want to say a couple months later, I received word once again, and that was not as much of a shocker in like, oh my God, this is so cool, this is happening. Like, it wasn't that same type of like fairy tale thing. Yeah. But if anything, that was more validating than actually getting the call initially. Because you get the call initially, it's like, okay, this person has heard you before, and they're willing to take this chance, and they're willing to take the shot on you. The fact that they called back, the fact that they liked it enough that they wanted more and they wanted me to return, that says we made the right choice. That says we see you as a fit for this place. That it wasn't like you didn't just get an audition, you got a call back. And in a strange way, that meant that much more, which was super cool.
Yeah, so I want to talk about a few of the guys you've got to call matches for. So this past summer, I got to finally work for Chaotic Wrestling, commentate for them, and I was talking.
Congratulations, my friend.
Thank you. I got to talk.
I actually heard that. I'm sorry to catch up. I heard that from Seabass Finn. He was just in California this past week, competing for West Coast Pro and training at the LA Dojo, training with Josh Barnett a little bit, and he actually told me the same. So I was very happy to hear that when he let me know.
I appreciate that. So that's what I was going to talk to you before the show, because I found out that day I was going to commentate for them. So I think maybe somebody knows show, and they asked me last minute. So before the show, I was asking people for commentary notes, and Seabass told me it was that very venue where you interviewed both him and Sean the Vegan about going on their expedition to Japan, to not like to the dojo, I mean. But you got to call that match for them at the dojo, that first show. So seeing the transition of those guys, being a part of that moment, tell me about those two.
It's unbelievable, man. I mean, I might sound like a shill, whatever. So seeing as I still do work for New Japan and still do call the Academy showcases, but this is the truth 100%. I knew Seabass and Sean Megan Keegan from back in New England. They were always good. They were always really, really solid wrestlers. Called their matches for Chaotic, called their matches for a couple of other promotions in New England. Fast forward 2.5 months. It's not a very long time. It's 2.5 months. It's twice a week training under Fred Rosser and Kushida. Calling their matches at the Academy Showcase, different wrestlers entirely. Not to say that they were bad before, far from it, but different wrestlers entirely. The way they stepped up their game, it's the little things, man. It's the little thing. It's the transitions. It's the way they lock on a hold. It's the intensity they have. It's what you can see in their face. It's all those little touches, man. Like it astounded me. I was expecting there to be improvement, but I was not expecting improvement at that level. And, you know, trust me, I know that relocating your life out to California is no easy feat. I know that the Academy courses are not cheap by any means, but if you want to invest in yourself and that's something that you're willing to do and you have the means to do so, it is money and time and resources well spent, because those two guys came out of that different wrestlers. Sean was in a 4-way. Seabass had a singles match with Tyler Bateman, and I was amazed. I think I even said on the call, like, these are different wrestlers, because they were, and they are.
So before we get into the next guy, I want to ask you that perspective. So you talked about it, lived in Massachusetts, born and raised, but you make the jump to California to better yourself, and hopefully it was the right call. So for you, like, how much effort did you do putting into that decision to do that and to make that jump? And are you proud with making that jump?
You know, it's a strange thing, because it both was for wrestling and it wasn't for wrestling. I came out to California for school, for college in 2019, before having really broken into the business, before knowing anything about, knowing anything about the scene out here in California. But I knew that it was something I always wanted to do. I knew that it was always my dream, and I knew that I was going to chase it one way or another. It was only a matter of when. And I think I had been around the Northeast scene my entire life. I loved it. I had a great reverence for it. Shaped me into the man and the wrestling fan that I am today. But I also knew that the people in New England, for good reason, are there, and they're there to stay. You talk about MLJ, you talk about Rich Palladino, you talk about Bobby Cruz. You know, I give you all the credit in the world, Chris, for doing what you're doing back in New England, because it is hard, man. Guys like that are there to stay, and they're there to stay for a reason. And it's because they're some of the best at what they do, at what we do. And so I just felt like, man, there's great wrestling out here, but as far as the announcing side of it, commentary side of it, market's kind of cornered. Right. I said, what better way to get a fresh start than a place like Southern California that is so legendary for pro wrestling, with places like Rev Pro and PWG, but at the time was in kind of a rebuilding phase, especially post-COVID. So I did come out here for school, but when the decision came, end of 2022, beginning of 2023, when I knew that graduation was on the horizon, I had to start kind of making some moves and making some plans for what post-grad life was going to be like. There were two options. It was move back east, move back to Massachusetts, or stick out here in California. And that was a tough choice, because I love home and I miss home dearly. And I'm not going to lie to you, I do have a tendency to get homesick a lot of the time, but I chose to stay out here. Yes, because LA is a cool, fun place to be in your 20s. Yes, because I have a lot of great friends out here. But above all else, it was the wrestling. It was the career and the name for myself that I've made in pro wrestling in the independent scene in Southern California. So it didn't get me out here, but it absolutely kept me out here. And yes, if I'm proud of that choice and happy with that choice, I couldn't be prouder. I couldn't be happier. Do I wish that Southern California wasn't a 6-hour plane ride from home, and that I could, visit, and that was easier to do for birthdays or holidays or what have you? Absolutely. But this is absolutely where I need to be. I've had a few people say this to me, and I don't agree with it. I think it's foolish to think this highly of yourself, or to even narrow this down to one person. But people have called me the voice of wrestling on the West Coast, the voice of wrestling in Southern California. And whether or not I agree with that is irrelevant. The fact that people think that of me is awesome, man. And as far as validating that decision and whether or not I'm happy with that decision, to me, that tells me everything I need to know.
Yeah, you're one of the best around. Like, I remember that Fight Life show. Frankie was telling me I was going to be on the call with Veda. So that was the first time I was on the call. I was making posts. I was hyped for it. And then I think you or Frankie texted me that you were on the call, and I was pumped for it. So I want to thank you for everything. But to go into that, almost when you made that sacrifice, and you've seen wrestling in California compared to down in New England, what do you think is the biggest difference in wrestling?
It's an excellent question. It's a really, really good question.
Or like the strong points from New England wrestling or where you are now?
Yeah, I would say the biggest difference, I kind of alluded to it earlier. I think wrestling in Southern California is a lot fresher and a lot newer and a lot more burgeoning than wrestling in New England. That's not to say that wrestling in New England is old or passe or anything like that. I don't mean that at all. But I think it was a real rebuilding phase. I think companies like PWG and Bar Wrestling, fast flashback to 5 years ago when I moved out here, they were foundational to the independent scene in Southern California. Those places, Bar especially and PWG, at least for the time being, don't really exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so where there's absence, where there's opportunity, necessity breeds innovation. And right. I think that's what we saw in Southern California. We saw a lot of places and a lot of people say, okay, there is absence. There is a void to fill. Let's fill it. And of course, that's trial and error. That's not going to happen overnight. That's not going to be perfect every step of the way. But it's been really, really cool to see that, and really, really cool to be a part of that. Because I think when you have something that's established and is good and has a fan base and is always going to be great, that's awesome. But there's not that same hunger. There's not that same fire under your ass as when you're really trying to build something from the ground up and you're really trying to make something out of something. So that's been really, really cool to see. But back in New England, I think you have the legacy and you have the history and you have, we talk about Ted Goodz, 2 decades in the game. You look at some of these people who have been, someone like a Chase Del Monte, someone like a Brian Malonis or a Donovan Dijak, these people who have carried that flag for so long and continue to carry that flag. Like that is powerful stuff, man. And you see that in the quality of their ring work. And you see that moreover, you talk about guys like a Chase or a Dijak who are training the next generation at a place like Nepois, the New England Pro Wrestling Academy. You see that same type of discipline and that same type of sharpness brought into the next generation and gifted to the next generation. And so I think it's legacy versus innovation. And that's not to say that there's no legacy in Southern California and there's no legacy in New England. But as far as the strong suits and what really stands out to me and what makes me proud to be from both places, call both places home and have homes in both places, that's what I'd say.
Nice. So I want to know your take on one wrestler. I see the post. You don't always look thrilled when you're commentating with this guy or even seeing him. Alan Angels.
Oh boy, where do I begin? Alan Angels.
Yeah.
Prestige wrestling world champion, current TNA superstar, former AEW superstar. Listen, I'll preface it by saying this. Alan Angels is an amazing wrestler. He is still in his mid-20s. And he is crazy good, crazy versatile, bust his ass. He's great. He's a great wrestler. It's just a shame that he's such an asshole.
Yeah.
Don't know if we can curse on this show. I'm sorry, Chris, but it's a shame. It's a shame that he's an asshole.
Yeah.
He just has this nasty attitude. He thinks he's better than everyone. He thinks he's entitled to everything. And especially now with the noise, Sinner and Saint, Travis Williams, and Judas Icarus by his side in Prestige, where I most often call his matches and God forbid call matches with him. Sometimes he does like to hop on commentary. It's a nightmare. I mean, especially with him holding the gold, especially with the noise, holding all the gold in Prestige. There's very few things that are worse than a jerk, but a jerk who has a point and a jerk who can back it up. I think that trumps it. And it's tough, man. It's tough to remain impartial. It's tough to not, and I pride myself on keeping it pretty straight and narrow in commentary. So it's tough to not curse as I just did on the broadcast. But he's taking years off my life. I got a lot of hair up here. It's going to be thin or gray by the time I'm done with Alan Angels, man, because he is a real piece of work, that guy.
And you talk about amazing wrestler and TNA superstar. Tell me about it. We talked about Veda Scott, but what was your first interaction with Speedball Mike Bailey?
Oh man, Speedball is the biggest sweetheart, Normal, as I call him, of Garfield fame, of course. Uh, First ever interaction with Speedball, I believe, was the same weekend that I worked with Veda that we did LA fights. I was helping out. I wasn't yet on the call with GCW proper at that point, so I was just helping out that night. I believe my job that evening was going around having guys sign posters, and I brought them back to him. And he very graciously signed them, did the whole thing. We're chitting and chatting. And I'd actually been a fan of his for many years. While he was banned from the States, he competed for a company in the UK called What Culture Pro Wrestling.
Oh yeah,
that I was a big fan of. You know WCPW, man. You know he was in the Pro Wrestling World Cup. And specifically a match he had with another Canuck in Brent Banks, I believe is the gentleman's name. It stuck out to me. It made me a fan all those years later. And so it was very cool to just tell him that and talk to him and sneak a little picture backstage. And from there on, we followed each other in social media. And again, a guy of that level who, one of the best wrestlers in the world. In my opinion, he's in the conversation with Danielson and Ospreay and anyone else as just that upper echelon. The way he's able to connect with the crowd, his athletic ability, the way he's able to do it so regularly, like his schedule is insane, man.
Mm-hmm.
Like, far and away the busiest schedule in wrestling. And to not only wrestle that much, but to do so consistently at that high level is unreal. And he's just such a nice guy. He's just such a good Canadian sweetheart of a man, always so complimentary of my work. Will go out of his way to repost something or to put the good word in for me. I know him and Veda have both done that on occasion.
Nice.
So I'm very, very fortunate to have called his matches as much as I have. And any day that I'm sharing a locker room with Speedball, it is a good day. He actually said that. I would say that made my day once. I saw him at a show. We crossed each other's paths, shook hands, did the whole deal. And he said, any day Jordan Castle is here is a good day. And I'll put that on my tombstone. Any day Jordan Castle is here is a good day. Speedball Mike Bailey.
Yeah, and the next person I want to ask you, I get to call a few matches with you, Masha Slamovich.
Yeah, Masha's great. I actually just saw her back in Portland this weekend as well. It's a theme this episode. We ate a great deal at Taco Bell and bonded over matcha, not to be confused with her. It's the beverage. It's the chai beverage, not Slamovich. Masha's awesome, man. You spoke about Emil earlier on in the episode. He actually got us connected very, very early on in my wrestling journey because she was coming out to LA to train with Josh Barnett and she needed a place to crash. And so she crashed with me in my college dorm at the time. And we just stayed in touch since then and stayed really, really good friends. And anytime that she's out west or I'm back east, we've really made a point to hang out and get together. And whether that's, getting food or heading into the city, it's always a good time. And it is always an adventure with Russian Dynamite. She is a really, really good pal. They say that you can count on one hand the amount of friends that you have in wrestling, like true friends, not just acquaintances or people you're friendly with. And I don't know if that's true. I don't know if I only have the 5, but if I do, she's definitely one of those fingers. She's definitely on that hand.
Yeah, when I was doing research, the last person I want to ask you about, I forgot how they worded a tweet about when you graduated college, like somebody you were graduating with or something, and you posted a photo with Jack Cartwheel. So what was your first interaction with Jack? Did you know him like in college that he was involved in wrestling, or how did that come to be?
So it's so funny. Me and Jack are in the same class. We graduated together. I did not know until the summer before our junior year that he was also. Frankly, honestly, I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know that he was a wrestler. I'd never met him to the best of my knowledge. And it wasn't until, I believe in Jacksonville, Florida at AEW Double or Nothing, the one they had in Bailey's place. It was the first show back fully with fans. I ran into Brett Lauderdale, promoter of GCW, and we got to talking and catching up. He said, "You're going to school, right?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "Whereabouts?" And I say, "Chapman University." He goes, "It's where Jack Cartwheel goes." No shit. So later that summer, saw Jack at a GCW show, introduced myself. I said, "You go to Chapman." And this was in Atlantic City, New Jersey. So I said, "You to Chapman, right?" He goes, "Yeah." I go, "Me too." Oh my God, crazy. What a small world. Exchanged information. And it wasn't long before we were back in California. And since then, I feel like the entirety of our junior and senior year, the entirety of our upperclassmen years, we ran into each other like almost every day.
Nice.
freaky. It was like he was following me or something. Like Jack Cartwheel was some type of stalker. But I started seeing him around everywhere, and in no time we started working shows together. But I thought that was the darndest thing. I learned that we went to school together in Florida. We met in Jersey, and we go to school together in California. It's just a very weird dichotomy there. Jack's great though, man. Another person that I definitely consider a good pal, a close confidant. And someone that I'm so happy to see killing it the way he is in Mexico and Japan and AEW and Ring of Honor. He's a really, really good egg, as they say.
So when we look at Jordan Castle, do you have a favorite suit or fit you've worn to a show?
Ooh, that's tough. That's tough, man. You're asking me to pick my favorite child. My mind first goes to the Bob Ross jacket that I've worn.
Oh, yeah.
I wore, yeah, you know the one. Worn it a couple times now, most recently for Roseland 8. But it's really sentimental for me for a few reasons. It was the jacket that I wore for my first full show. I mentioned that I did the pre-show for VXS in August, and then the first full broadcast I did was September for them. So it was the first jacket that I wore for my first ever full broadcast, full pro wrestling show. So it'll always have that for me. I wore it for Garden State Pro Wrestling, RIP, their show Welcome to Eden. That was a really, really special one for me. I had my folks front row. That card was stacked top to bottom. That was, we as commentators are part of the hyperbole, Chris, you know this, but that was a special kind of energy. That was a crowd of 200-300 people maybe, but you could have convinced me that was a stadium of 20,000. I mean, the noise they were making, how hot, how loud, how invested they were for 3-4 hours straight. It was really, really something, man. It was really, really something. And so I wore that jacket for that. Holds a lot of sentimental value there. Though I have to say, and this is a bit of an inside scoop, it may have to get hung up in the rafters. It may have to get retired one of these days, because when I wore it last for Roseland 8, I noticed there was a little, I believe it's blood, probably is the only thing I can surmise, but there's a little stain on the collar there. And so it may have seen its days. We may have to hang that one, high above the center.
Was that your blood, or?
I don't even know if it is blood, to be honest with you. It looks blood-ish, but I don't know.
What about dry cleaners or anything? No?
We'll give it a try. I was actually speaking to someone the other day, and they made the same suggestion. So I'll give it a shot. We'll do the dry clean thing. But if not, then it might have to be shipped away to the the museum.
Yeah. So for me, I did one suit. I wore the jacket. I don't even know why I did the show I did with you. I did an all teal suit.
You looked great.
It was great. Teddy was advertising. It was his high school, Westport Mania. So I'm like, all right, I'll go all out. I spent a decent amount on a suit. I wore it once. I'm never going to touch it again. Like, never. I just like you talk about in wrestling, like sometimes we want to have those memories. So everyone was crazy, like shocked. I wore an all like custom teal suit. After that, no more, because it was about that memory. So when we talk about memories for you, what have been like your most memorable moments in wrestling?
Oh man, too many to count, dude. Honestly. First one that comes to mind, first one that I always go back to is calling Roderick Strong's first match back in independent wrestling in 7 years against Kevin Blackwood last summer for Prestige in LA. So much about that. I mean, Roddy means so much to independent wrestling, specifically in California with his work in PWG. To have it happen in the Globe Theater, which is, talk about PWG, a building that has so much history there. Just talking to Roddy beforehand, I mean, he could not have been a more gracious, giving guy with his time. Must have chatted and gave notes to me and Jack Farmer for 20 minutes beforehand. And I don't think he'll mind me saying this, because you can see it on the stream. You can see the tears in his eyes. He got really emotional talking about it. Like you could tell that moment meant something to him to return to the Indies. And I think it'd be very easy for a guy to be at that level and do what he's done and say, oh, it's just an easy paycheck, whatever. But it wasn't. It really meant something to him, and that moment meant something to him. And for me to be a part of that moment is something I'll remember for the rest of my days. Same with Cardona and Nemeth, like we were talking about earlier. Same with earlier this year, the Motor City Machine Guns, Chris Sabin and Alex Shelley. their sort of swan song to indie wrestling at prestigious Combat Clash PDX. They wrestled each other in an amazing match. And actually, I'm wearing the Alex Shelley shirt right now.
I love
so
that.
There it is. New Japan is absolutely up there. I've loved every time working for them, but specifically the thrill and the buzz of the first Academy Showcase was just so stupid cool. Roseland 3, like I mentioned, the first time I ever got flown out to call a wrestling show. Same with Garden State. Welcome to Eden. I feel like, the most special moments have kind of, I brought them up myself because I still think of them. I still hold them right here. They mean that much to me. I'm sure I could spend another 20 minutes just rattling off matches and shows and all sorts of other junk. But those are the big ones that come to mind immediately.
And to go with that, you've gotten to travel a lot with wrestling. Is there like a favorite venue or somewhere you've gotten to call a show from?
Roseland Theater, I think. Yeah. The Roseland Theater in Portland, Oregon. Viking Pavilion's up there, also in Portland. Globe Theater in LA is up there. Shit, man, I say that, but all right. Okay, here's what I'll tell you. Roseland Theater, because it's this amazing venue, just a perfect venue for wrestling. Looks gorgeous. Packs, both is super packed, looks super packed, but also still feels intimate no matter where you are. Just so unique looking with the purple walls. And again, the sentimental connection of it being the first place I was ever flown out to call a wrestling show. So that's right there. Right next to it is the White Eagle in Worcester, Massachusetts. Because man, there was a time where I was the biggest Beyond wrestling fan in the world. I think back to, American Rana and Heavy Lies the Crown and Uncharted Territory there. You go back and watch those shows from 2017 to 2019, and I am front and center for a good 90% of them, banging on the mat, heckling people, blonde hairdo, about 40, 50 pounds heavier, 5 or 6 inches shorter, and it was just a really special place for a good moment in time there, and a place where I made a lot of memories. And so to bring that full circle and to work there, and I'm getting emotional talking about it, to call wrestling there with Alyssa Marino, someone who is just an amazing person and who I love really, really dearly, to get to work with her for the first time, be at the White Eagle for the first time, with people like AG and Kevin Blackwood and Willow Nightingale, who I watched for so many years outside the ring on the other side of the curtain. That was really special. That is a moment, and that is one that I definitely put right up there with the ones I was talking about before, like Roddy and the Guns and Garden State. Like that is right up there with the best of them. So White Eagle, Roseland Theater, neck and neck, man. They're right there next to each other.
So we talk about a lot of people today, but who has Jordan Castle really learned from, or who are some of your biggest mentors in wrestling?
Prazak, number one, far and away. I mean, there's a lot of them. He's certainly not the only one, but Prazak far and away, like I was talking about earlier, just, he's been doing this almost 30 years now. 20, I believe, just celebrated 27 or 28 a few months back. And he's getting done the dance, man. Like he was calling CM Punk matches and Bryan Danielson matches and Samoa Joe matches in the golden era of Ring of Honor. Like that's a living legend right there. And I learn something every time I work with Dave, something that I hold with me invaluably every time I work with Dave Prazak. So top of the list is Dave, but there's a bunch of them, man. I feel like every time I work with James Kincaid, voice of West Coast Pro, I learn a ton. I don't get to work with James as much as I once did, and I do miss working with him, but I always feel like same thing. He was so gracious with his time, so giving with his knowledge. So I've learned a ton from him. And now I'm going to feel bad because I'm forgetting names, and there's, a million people. Alyssa Marino, I mentioned a moment ago. She is, formerly of NXT, now killing it on the East Coast, but a former California girl herself. She is just a pro's pro. Though honestly, man, it sounds like a bit of a cop-out. I think I learned something from everyone I work with. Genuinely, I think I do. I don't think I've ever left a show and been like, wow, that was a dud. I think I've always picked something up from every show I've done and from every person I've worked with, big or small, whatever it is. I've always left that much more knowledgeable. And I feel really, really grateful for that.
So I remember having that talk, and you said Cardona was your guy. You wanted to do something with him. You got to call a few matches now for him, I assume.
Yes, sir.
I seen the post. Dijak, you just got to call a match for. Who else is on that list now?
Well, all right. My fantasy one that's not going to happen because he's calling it a day pretty soon, and I don't see myself. Knock on wood. I'd certainly talk, Mr. Levesque. Give me a call. But my fantasy pick is Johnny Fabo Jr., John Cena.
Yeah.
He just as a kid whose honeymoon phase was 2009, 2010, 2011, growing up watching WWE, he was the guy. And I just was instantly entranced with him. I was a member of the C Nation right away. So John Cena would be amazing. Do not see that happening. As far as a realistic answer, absolutely Orange Cassidy. I mentioned that fandom of Beyond in the late 2010s. That directly coincided with his emergence as a top star in indie wrestling, capturing the IWTV title and going on the reign that he had with it. He had the similar storyline in AEW if he's going to try, and then had the feuds with the likes of Jericho and Moxley and whoever else. The blueprint for that was at Beyond. The blueprint for that was his time with the IWTV title. And I would be really, really blessed if I got the opportunity to call a match of his. Because he's the man. I think he, for someone who always gets yelled at and lambasted online by old heads about he's a disgrace to the business and he's exposing this and he's ruining that. I think he understands pro wrestling at such a fundamental level, so much more than anyone else does. The way he is able to mix the athletic piece of it, the actual physical side of professional wrestling, with storytelling, with captivating a crowd, and do so to subvert the expectations of a modern wrestling match while still honoring them, while not being like, this is a farce and this is silly and wink, wink, nudge, nudge. That is not easy to do. And he is the master of it, has instant chemistry with anyone. Just the best. Freshly squeezed Orange Cassidy is the man. And got the chance to reconnect with him back in April of 2023 around Mania weekend. And he actually remembered me from those days of Beyond fandom and cosplaying as him with, Canadian tuxedo and orange juice bottle and everything. And he had some really, really kind and encouraging things to say. And especially after that, I definitely want to make that happen somewhere down the line. And I think it will. I have a good feeling it will.
Well, Jordan, this is one of my favorite interviews I've done. However, I've ended every interview the same. The day it's time, which is not going to happen anytime soon, the day you're ready to call it a day in pro wrestling, what do you want your legacy to be remembered for in pro wrestling?
I don't know. I want to say I said this in a recent interview. I think legacy is kind of a strange thing because you have such little control over it. And to me, it's going to sound so hippy dippy and so like pretentious LA, but fuck it. I think that my AirPods just died. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. They're still going. I just gave me a little warning. So good thing we're wrapping it up. I think that it is foolish to think about what are people going to think of me? How is this work going to outlive me or outlast me, or what's going to be the legacy of this? Because there is so little control over that. And I'm not going to be around when it's perceived one way or another. And so I don't think about that too much as far as my legacy and as far as what I leave behind. I care more about what I'm doing now. I care more about if you go to a show that I'm bringing out, so you're watching a show at home that I'm on commentary for, are you entertained? Can I help you understand what's going on and connect easier and better and more fully to what's going on in that ring because of my words? Can I enhance this incredible wrestling because of what I'm saying? Can I do what the likes of a Michael Cole or a Tony Chimmel did for me as a kid? Not 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, but now in the moment. And I don't really know if that's legacy, but that's what's important to me. As far as legacy, as far as how I'm remembered, if you do want to get technical with that, I think more than anything else, just being a good person, not being an asshole or a weirdo. and just treating people with respect and having that be mutual. That's primero numero uno to me.
Yeah, well, Jordan, I want to thank you for doing this, and I want to thank you for everything. My first ever Fight Live show, you got to be on the call for, so thank you for that, and thank you for everything over these years, man.
Of course, man. It's been my pleasure. I'm so glad that we got the chance to do it and that we've stayed connected since. I look forward to doing it again. I don't know when I'll be back east or when you'll be back west, potentially out west.
If Sean Spears is down there, maybe we got to make it happen.
That's what I'm saying, man. Desperate times call for desperate measures. But no, I appreciate you saying that, and I appreciate you having me on. And this has been a treat, my friend. Let's do it again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jordan, for doing this. And thank you, everybody, for watching this episode. This was Best for Business.